Three-dimensional mythological universe. The transition from two-dimensionality to three-dimensionality is analogous to the transition from one-dimensionality to two-dimensionality. The fracture of the plane is the death of the plane on the fracture line and at the same time the birth of the three-dimensional volume. If two-dimensional space could be mastered only by heroes, then no one dares to embrace the grandiose three-dimensional space. The pride of individual life is humbled here and loses its former ethical value. The three-dimensional volume is perceived as infinity, as a bottomless, unchanging and neutral receptacle of everything and anything, in no way connected with linearly flowing time. This perception of space and time, reflected in the Euclidean-Newtonian model of the world, directly affects the formation of new ethical values. The center of the three-dimensional universe is no longer a lone hero with his individual patron gods, nor a clan of fathers with the gods of the ancestors, but an all-encompassing reality called the One God. One cannot even dare to think of surpassing it in any way. All men become equal in their helplessness and defenselessness before this one unrivaled divine reality. The highest ethical value in three-dimensionality becomes the law of retribution given to people from God. If in the all-encompassing divine space a crime was once committed by someone, sooner or later a precisely balanced punishment will be sure to befall the criminal. The law of retribution has been formulated in different versions in different cultural regions. In Indian contemplation it is the concept of karma, i.e. the total sum of deeds committed by any living being and their consequences. The biblical golden rule of behavior speaks of the same balance. Do not do to another what you do not want others to do to you. The 10 Commandments handed down by God through Moses, which make up the law, are from the same line. The law is based on the fear of punishment, and rests upon each individual man, who is now declared to be the receptacle of sin. Individual immortality in three-dimensionality cannot exist in principle. Immortality can be achieved only in God and in merging with God. In fact, Kant spoke about three-dimensionality in his famous phrase that two things strike him most of all: the starry sky above my head and the moral law in me. A three-dimensional worldview leads to monotheism. The creators of monotheism are widely known: Moses, Muhammad. Buddha and Christ can belong to this series only to the extent that their doctrines were perceived by their followers and interpreters as three-dimensional. In fact, they are not. The common three-dimensional feature of any monotheism is an ideology based on God's law, which prescribes man's place solely as a fear-filled enforcer of that law. Man must always fall down before the law, sometimes up to 5 times a day. In this way man develops concepts of law-abidingness and equality of all before the law. The law is harsh, but it is the law. In the distant two-dimensional times of lawlessness of field commanders, skinning of defeated enemies, the proclaimed equality of all before God's law was the bright future of all mankind. At this stage of mythological consciousness, it is believed that the supreme ruler or high priest is endowed with supernatural powers and is an incarnation of the supreme deity. It is believed that these characters can control the course of both natural and social phenomena. They are held responsible for bad weather, bad harvests, failure in war, etc. It is implied that the supreme power over nature and subordinate slaves is exercised through the willful acts of the supreme ruler or the high priest. It is they who are blamed for calamities that occur for lack of will, negligence, or criminal behavior. They are punished, up to and including the death penalty. The personality of the ruler is considered as the dynamic center of the three-dimensional universe, from which the power lines of his supreme will diverge in all directions. The ruler is the fulcrum on which the balance of the three-dimensional world rests. The slightest inaccuracy in his actions can break this balance. Therefore, the life of the ruler must be regulated to the smallest detail by various sacred rituals. Supreme rulers in all parts of the globe in all historical times lived and live in such a three-dimensional way. The guardian of the three-dimensional order in society is the royal, Khan, imperial, etc. power. The representatives of this power are naturally declared to be divinely chosen and endowed with the burden of preserving the commanded law of God. A classic example on this theme is in European mythology, the cycle of legends about King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, associated with the Divine Grail Cup. The development of three-dimensional ethics leads to the emergence of various sets of regulations and rules governing the life of the human community. The oldest extant code is the Code of the Babylonian King Hammurabi. Other variations on this theme are the codes of customary law of Central Asian peoples, as well as the well-known Confucian rules of behavior, Roman law, the Napoleonic Code, the Japanese philosophy of Bushido, etc. All these sets of rules are not considered here from their legal side, but are given as examples of systematization of three-dimensional ethics. In the history of culture, authors' versions of ideal societies based on three-dimensional ethics are also known, in the works of Plato, Campanella, Thomas More. The real carriers of three-dimensional ethics in different cultural areas are at first privileged strata of society: European courtly knights, Russian princes, close vassals of the imperial dynasties of China, Japan, and so on. The three-dimensional organization of social life is hierarchical, ceremonial, class-based, and has a developed system of external distinctive attributes. Thus, as on the Mobius sheet, guided by ethics and related dimensionality, we have come out of mythological distances practically to the present day. It is impossible to agree with some cultural theses that modern culture is post-mythological. It is certainly not post-mythological, but carries in itself as a dominant the mythologeme of three-dimensionality, i.e. the three-dimensional space-time form of mythological consciousness. Nowadays myth-making takes on new features. From the field of ancient mythology we enter the field of modern literature. The links between myth and literature are extensive. They constitute a whole direction in literary studies. Even a cursory review of them would lead far away from the main topic. Let us only note that literature, as a sensitive barometer, shows the spiritual growth of man over the centuries of actual experience of three-dimensionality. Having freed man from the two-dimensional lawlessness of field commanders, the bright three-dimensional future, happiness for all, the city of sunshine and joy, the kingdom of Christ without Christ, with its rigid ideological dogmas and ideal police rules become cramped for man. Already Thomas Mann wrote the novel The Loyalist, discovering in the soul of a law-abiding citizen the sprouts of future fascism. Already Dostoevsky in The Imp and the Brothers Karamazov brilliantly sees the coming three-dimensional kingdom of the Grand Inquisitor. As the entire course of modern history and in particular the bloody 20th century shows, when all people are equal before each other and before the supreme power only as nuts and bolts, equal only in their slavery to some imposed ideology, undoubtedly, in its apatheicized expression, monotheism eventually leads to fascism. At first salvific, three-dimensionality becomes a dystopian cage for man. All the world is a prison, says Hamlet, burdened by his three-dimensional status as a prince. Where is the way out? The way out, as before, is one, to become a person of the next dimension. Next time we will consider the four-dimensional mythological universe.